Today, I'm going to take a look at some of my favourite WWF and WWE debuts. Some of these debuts were expected by fans, others were a complete surprise, but all of them were pretty memorable. As a quick heads up, these are going to be TV debuts or gimmick debuts. Some of the superstars featured in this video could have worked for the company in the past using a different name, they may have already appeared in developmental, or they could have had a few dark matches during TV tapings that didn't make it to air. The superstars featured aren't in any kind of order, but the final two selections are probably my favourite debuts of all time. I find it very hard to choose which one's better, but you can let me know your favourites in the comments. Right, let's get started then with one of the biggest legends in WWE history.
Holy cow! Look at the size of that ham hock!
I don't need to bang on about how important The Undertaker was or how much fans loved him during a WWE career that spanned around 3 decades. What I do want to bang on about though was how The Undertaker's debut set the tone for what was to come. The Undertaker could very well be the greatest character in pro wrestling history, and the vast majority of his career was seriously character driven. Yes, there was the American Badass and Big Evil stuff that let Mark Calaway show a more personal side of The Undertaker that still to this day seems to divide wrestling fans. But if there's one guy who took his gimmick seriously both inside and outside the ring, it was definitely The Undertaker. The Phenom made his TV debut at the 1990 Survivor Series. He did have a WWF match before this on the November 19th, 1990 Superstars taping, however this aired after the pay-per-view, and The Undertaker looked more like an old western mortician rather than a dark supernatural being. Originally, he was named Kane the Undertaker, a name that would be given to his storyline brother 7 years later, and The Undertaker served as a mystery partner on Ted DiBiase's $1 Million Survivor Series team. Taker eliminated Coco Beware and Dusty Rhodes before getting himself counted out, and fans were left awestruck by this new giant who just arrived at the World Wrestling Federation. His manager, Brother Love, was soon replaced by Paul Bearer, and the rest, as they say, is history. The debut was very memorable, The Undertaker looked completely unstoppable, and the WWF now had a new outlandish character that they could, and would, take down many different story paths. Quick side note, The Undertaker thought he was going to pop out of the giant egg that was brought along to Survivor Series 1990. He was seriously concerned that Vince was going to give him some crazy gimmick where he came out of the egg and his career would go downhill from that point. Thankfully though, that didn't happen. The Giant was a former 2-time WCW World Heavyweight Champion, and for a time he was a main player in World Championship Wrestling. The problem was, WCW had a lot of main players, and while the Giant was able to find success very early in his WCW run, he ended up getting lost in the NWO Shuffle, where he would join and leave the group on 2 separate occasions. Being such an attraction and being such a large athlete, it's kinda crazy to think that Paul would get treated just like any other member of the ever-growing NWO faction. And to make matters worse, the big man said he was getting paid a fraction of what the other main eventers were getting on the roster. The Giant didn't get one of those juicy ex-WWF superstar contracts, yet he understood his worth as such a unique performer. So Paul signed a 10-year contract with the WWF and he made a memorable debut at the St. Valentine's Day Massacre pay-per-view in February 1999. This debut was pretty creative. Stone Cold Steve Austin and Vince McMahon were involved in a cage match that Stone Cold had to win, yet Paul White was going to debut and align himself with Mr. McMahon. How do you introduce this gigantic superstar that gives the heel an unfair advantage, yet the babyface still ends up winning the match? Well, Paul appeared from under the ring and he destroyed Steve Austin. The fans in the arena thought all hope was lost, while coming to terms that WCW's Giant was standing in the middle of a WWF ring doing a number on their favourite superstar. Paul then grabbed Stone Cold, he threw him into a cage panel. The sheer force of the throw made the cage open up and Austin won the match by touching the floor. Austin may have won, but White still looked good by showing off his insane strength that he seemingly had no control over. So it all worked out pretty well in my opinion.
You got it. The real world's champion, Ric Flair!
Ric Flair did have a few matches in the WWF in the mid-70s, and he was also involved in 2 WWF vs NWA Championship matches with Bob Backlund in 1979 and 1982. But his official WWF debut was as controversial as it was historic. I've covered this in depth in the past, like many folks here on YouTube, but what was so significant about Ric Flair's debut was the fact that he brought the NWA Championship belt with him. Bobby Heenan was teasing the debut of the real World Champion for weeks. He even showed the NWA Championship belt on WWF programming before Flair made his official debut. And then on WWF Primetime Wrestling in September 1991, Flair finally arrived at the WWF. The NWA didn't return Flair's $25,000 deposit, which all superstars who held the championship had to put down, so Flair felt that he owned the belt until his deposit was paid back. The WWF took full advantage of this, and the fact that Flair held this distinguished championship that didn't belong to the World Wrestling Federation was used as a storyline. The WWF champion paled in comparison to the real World Champion, according to Heenan and Flair, of course. Take away the big gold belt, and this is still Ric Flair on WWF programming, a cornerstone of the NWA and WCW. Dream matches were now a real possibility, with Flair vs Hulk Hogan being right at the top of many people's wish lists, although that match unfortunately didn't materialise on pay-per-view. WCW, on the other hand, didn't know when to stop booking Flair vs Hogan during the mid to late 90s.
These are the rookies from the first season of NXT out here.
While all members of the Nexus debuted during the original version of NXT, the faction debut was really something else. The reality version of NXT wasn't very well received. Yes, it is kind of fun looking back on now, just to see how ridiculous it was, but in terms of making new stars and making the newcomers look like badasses, it didn't really work. Even someone like Bryan Danielson, who was well known at the time, wasn't safe from the silliness that was NXT. Still, the WWE made up for it by putting all the NXT contestants together into a stable immediately after Season 1 wrapped up, and the group went on to completely destroy Monday Night Raw on the 7th of June 2010. Calling themselves the Nexus, this band of newcomers attacked John Cena, CM Punk, Luke Gallows, commentators, and quite famously the ring announcer, while tearing the ring completely down. The destruction Nexus brought was a sight to behold, and what I liked about this debut was the fact that it felt very spontaneous and unexpected. These guys at one point were all trying to get themselves a WWE contract while competing against each other, but they were now being led by Season 1 winner Wade Barrett, and they were here to destroy WWE. In a way, it harkened back to a certain famous company takeover angle. As time went on, the group would split up, creating a sub-faction known as the Core. The original Nexus got a new leader in CM Punk, and things would then fizzle out as Punk began his well-documented chase for John Cena's WWE Championship.
Brock Lesnar! You know who it is, but what's he doing out here?
Those who kept up to date with Ohio Valley Wrestling knew who Brock Lesnar was, and fans who attended TV tapings saw Brock wrestle inside a WWF ring long before his official debut. But when Brock showed up on the 18th of March 2002 episode of Raw, fans had no choice but to believe Paul Heyman when he said Lesnar was the next big thing. Lesnar looked like a monster as he destroyed Al Snow, Maven, and Spike Dudley. The triple powerbomb Spike took was absolutely insane, and this beatdown delivered by Brock solidified him as a real threat right out the gate. Lesnar's mere presence would have been more than enough for the WWF to give him a mega push, but the fact that he had Paul Heyman serving as his manager guaranteed fans that the company were going to go all the way with this former NCAA heavyweight champion. Brock would indeed go on to have a remarkable pro wrestling career, taking a break to prove how much of a badass he was by competing in UFC, only to come back to pro wrestling to cause more havoc. Recent allegations have certainly put Brock in a seriously bad light, however, and at the time of scripting this video, his professional career remains very uncertain.
The new general manager of Raw, Eric Bischoff!
Fans fans who didn't watch pro wrestling during the Monday Night War and fans who haven't took the time to watch some old episodes of Nitro will never comprehend how surprising it was to see Eric Bischoff on WWF programming. It was always said that Vince McMahon would hire practically anybody if it made business sense, and the signing of Eric Bischoff, I feel, proves that statement quite well. Eric went on WCW programming where he would frequently take shots at Vince McMahon. He gloated quite a lot while WCW was on their Monday night win streak while claiming to be the king of professional wrestling. He also tried to hurt McMahon from a business perspective by giving away WWF results and revealing storyline angles, such as Vince being the Ministry of Darkness Greater Power. He challenged Vince McMahon to a fight on pay-per-view. So with all these cheap shots, you'd think Vince McMahon would take great delight in not offering Eric any further work opportunities when WCW got bought out. Not only did Vince bring Eric in on the July 15th, 2002 episode of Raw, he also embraced him on the entrance stage before giving Eric free rein to talk about how he almost ran the WWF out of business. In one of the most underrated promos of all time, Eric talked about his win streak, how Vince McMahon took his eye off the ball while under trial with the federal government, how Bischoff rated the WWF of all their big name talent, and how Bischoff was cutting edge and forward thinking while giving away WWF match results. Bischoff right here was pretty much reprising his heel role that made him so delightfully unlikable during his time in the New World Order, and Eric would go on to become one of, if not the best general managers in WWE history. It's one of those debuts that I thought would never happen, but it made a lot of sense. Having Eric run Monday Night Raw, the show he tried so hard to beat every single week during the height of the Monday Night Wars, was actually a stroke of genius. The only thing I didn't like about this debut was the fact that they showed Eric backstage having a quick run-in with Booker T just before Vince announced Eric as the new GM. They really should have kept a big surprise for when he walked out onto the Raw entrance stage.
These three guys just came rushing through the crowd. They attacked Ryback.
Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose, or rather Tyler Black and Jon Moxley, were well-known competitors on the independent scene who fans were aware of. Roman Reigns was being groomed as a future WWE megastar when these three met up in Florida Championship Wrestling, but do keep in mind that Jon Moxley had competed on WWE TV back in 2006 as a job guy. CM Punk stated that the idea of bringing in this faction known as The Shield was actually his idea, and Chris Hero was supposed to be in the group instead of Roman Reigns. And Punk also stated that the idea for this faction came to be when he rejected leading a new stable himself that was going to feature Daniel Bryan in the Big Show. Punk also said that he pitched the idea of leading this new group and he felt that the WWE scrapped it so they could take all the credit. But do remember too that this was during a time when Punk was pretty bitter about anything remotely associated with the company. Former WWE writer Kevin Eck has a totally different story about the Shield's original plan. According to him, Tommy Dreamer was going to introduce the group on Raw 1000 as a babyface team, only for them to turn heel and attack Dreamer. But again, take it with a pinch of salt because we don't really know if this is true. Still, the group known as The Shield debuted at the 2012 Survivor Series, interfering in a triple threat match featuring CM Punk, John Cena and Ryback. NXT wasn't as prominent as it would become even a few months later, so fans were a bit confused when the trio launched their attack during the main event. But Michael Cole was quick to name all three men and explain that they're from WWE's developmental territory. The Shield didn't go after CM Punk, and questions would quickly arise regarding Punk's relationship with Seth Rollins, Dean Ambrose, and Roman Reigns. The Shield would say they were only in WWE to serve justice, even if that means going after fan favourites. And even though Punk's enemies seemed to always fall victim to the Shield, it would turn out that the group had no allegiance to the Second City Saint. All three men would go on to have incredible careers, with Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns being current WWE main eventers, and Moxley seemingly enjoying wrestling elsewhere. We can't really say the Shield was responsible for giving all three members their first proper exposure, but for those who only watch WWE's main shows, Survivor Series 2012 serves as the beginning of something really special. At one point in time, it was hard to imagine AJ Styles in WWE, but AJ's ended up fitting into his new job rather well, and it's going to be a sad day when the phenomenal one decides to retire. The first ever X Division champion, the first ever TNA Grand Slam champion, the first ever TNA Triple Crown champion, voted Mr. TNA numerous times. AJ really did it all while working for TNA, and he gave fans some incredible matches while working for the company. The WWE were interested in AJ long before he made his debut, but AJ said he wanted to let his wife pursue her dream of being a teacher, and the WWE's travel schedule would have seriously interfered with his home life at the time. So AJ became a legend of TNA while also making stops in Ring of Honor, Mexico and Japan. Now, AJ did work very briefly for the WWF long before his debut. He appeared on Metal back in 2002, so technically you could say this was actually a return. But AJ's appearance on Metal's more like pro wrestling trivia, and besides, he became a true established superstar in TNA, and the phenomenal AJ Styles that appeared at the 2016 Royal Rumble was vastly different from the one back in 2002. AJ entered the Royal Rumble after a lot of rumour and a lot of speculation. It was a great moment for sure, but to be honest, it was ruined a little by the WWE's production team. Mr. Kevin Dunn thought it was more appropriate to show Roman Reigns' reaction to AJ's Titantron rather than show the I Am Phenomenal reveal on the big screen. So the crowd pops like crazy while folks at home have to wait an extra few seconds to see what all the fuss is about. Some may think this is nitpicking, but I think it's absolutely essential to show the stage before the big reveal. We'll talk about that a bit more later on. AJ's WWE debut was a positive one overall though, and thankfully the WWE would book him pretty favourably as time went on. He may have made his name elsewhere, but McMahon still gave AJ Styles a big push. On the flip side, we have Sting, a man who was always concerned about how Vince McMahon would treat him should he ever show up in WWE. Now, we all know what happened, and I think most of us are in agreement that Sting should have beat Triple H at WrestleMania. Just put that out of your mind for a moment though, and think back to Sting's debut. Like Eric Bischoff appearing on WWE TV, you just never imagined the Stinger showing up to work under Vince McMahon, and seeing as Sting was so vocal about not signing a WWE contract, it made his eventual debut even more shocking. Before showing up at Survivor Series 2014, it was announced that Sting would be a playable character in the upcoming WWE 2K15 video game, so fans knew that the WWE and Sting had come to some sort of business arrangement. This would evolve into a proper WWE run that began when the Icon interfered in the Team Authority vs Team Cena main event Survivor Series match, and thanks to Sting stopping an attack from Triple H, Dolph Ziggler was able to win the match for his team. Not only did this result in Dolph Ziggler having one of the best matches of his whole career, but it also meant the Authority would be removed from power within WWE. Sting was a WCW icon, a man who stuck with WCW until the very last day of the company's existence. He then found a ton of success in TNA when a big money offer was available from Vince McMahon, but Sting saw what happened to his old WCW colleagues who went to WWF, and he wasn't eager to suffer the same fate. In the end, Sting decided to join because he wanted to work a match at WrestleMania. Fans thought we might finally see the long-awaited dream match of Sting vs Undertaker, but instead Triple H defeated Sting at WrestleMania, and Sting's run was cut short after a match against Seth Rollins on pay-per-view. The run itself wasn't good, the debut, however, was brilliant, a moment we thought would never happen. In ECW, Taz was booked very well. Paul Heyman made Taz a serious threat, and he made the human suplex machine feel legitimate. Taz was scheduled to make his WWF debut at the 2000 Royal Rumble. Taz is from Brooklyn. The Rumble was held in Madison Square Garden. The debut wasn't billed, so it was all a big surprise. So you can imagine the pop Taz got when that music hit and Taz made his way down to the ring. Angle made sure to rip into the New York fans just before Taz made his entrance, and what followed was Taz knocking Angle out in around 3 minutes or so following a Taz mission. Keep in mind too that Kurt Angle had not been beaten yet in a WWF match, and Taz made the Olympic gold medalist pass out. The debut was great. It was easily one of the greatest reactions you'll ever see in Madison Square Garden, and I honestly forgot how crazy the audience went during Taz's entrance. It certainly set the Royal Rumble pay-per-view up to be an all-timer. But Taz would explain years later that Royal Rumble 2000 was not only his best career moment, but also one of his worst. Many fans felt that Taz was a made man in the WWF following this debut, but there's a few possible reasons why his career didn't take off the way many thought it would. Taz said the following on the Talk is Jericho podcast.
And here's what happened. When I hooked him in the choke, he got choked out. I didn't notice till after when I heard the commentary back. JR and King was saying it's an illegal choke, it's an illegal choke, like that. That was not part of the shtick, bro. I got kind of worked on that.
Oh, really? Like
I got swerved, yeah.
In what way? That like you were under the assumption that's your finish?
Yeah. There was no words told to me by the writers or anybody that's going to be an illegal choke. We're going to do this thing. I knew Kurt was going to get stretchered, but I didn't know it was going to be called an illegal choke. Like that never came. Those words never came to my ears until I heard the commentary the next day in catering, watching the tape back, the VHS, as you know, we used to use the VHS. And here's another funny thing. When I came through the curtain right after that, dude, it was like a ghost town. Vince wasn't a gorilla. There was, and this is live Royal Rumble.
Really?
Bro, it was like, I thought, and I'm like, I guess I got heat. It was
wow.
Yeah. What happened during the match, if you go back and watch it, it was a German suplex spot where I did a German to Kurt and flip him, and he lands on his belly. What happened was when I grabbed Kurt, he popped up, and I put him back down. Because I knew, and I've suplexed you many times, and I would always say to guys, let me control you, I'll protect you, and you got it right away. And Kurt was just, we didn't know each other that well in the ring, and Kurt, he's a working machine, he's aggressive, how he is, and I knew the timing was way off, and I knew if I went through with that throw, he was going to get hurt.
Right.
I knew it. I put him back down and then did the throw on my pacing, and he was fine. But what happened was, that little hiccup, from what I feel and what I heard, freaked out the boss and some of his people that are close to him.
Wow.
And
that's all it takes.
That's all it takes, brother.
Welcome to Raw is Jericho!
We just heard Y2J speaking with Taz about his debut, but Jericho had an awesome debut himself that many consider to be the greatest of all time. For weeks, a countdown clock appeared on Raw that was going to stop at the new millennium, only it was actually going to stop a few months before the year 2000. The time ran out on the August 9th, 1999 episode of Raw's War, and while fans were seriously hyped up to see the WWF debut of Chris Jericho, details of his signing were actually posted online weeks before his arrival. Still, the countdown clock was a great idea, one that Chris got inspired by while waiting in line at a post office. Remember how I said earlier on about WWE making a big mistake by not showing the big screen during AJ Styles' debut? Well, the Raw's War Titantron was used to great effect for this debut as the word Jericho appeared on the screen just before the Ayatollah appeared on the stage. The text itself was one of the most memorable things about the debut, and that's before Jericho began cutting his first ever WWF promo, a promo he had cut as The Rock stood in the middle of the ring. I covered this whole debut quite recently on Reliving the War. Look up episode 196 if you want something a bit more in depth. But personally speaking, I was a massive Jericho fan during Chris's days in WCW, and seeing him on WWF programming was very exciting. Unfortunately, Jericho, and indeed fans of Jericho, may have envisioned his first few months in WWF playing out a little differently. Chris had a hard time fitting into the WWF locker room, and it took him a little while to adjust to the backstage politics that ran rampant in Vince McMahon's company. But it wouldn't take long for Chris to adjust, and he would go on to win multiple championships during his tenure with WWF or WWE. Jericho wrote in his book that he wasn't happy with how his debut went, but it seems like most fans disagree with the man himself. This one always gets ranked up there as one of the all-time greats, and I too think it's a fantastic debut.
That's gotta be Kane! That's gotta be Kane!
Finally, it's the Big Red Machine, The Undertaker's little brother who showed up at IYH Badd Blood in 1997. The arrival of Kane had been teased for months. Paul Bearer revealed The Undertaker's dark secret long before Kane made an appearance in WWF. As the story originally goes, The Undertaker accidentally started a fire at the family funeral home, killing both Mummy and Daddy Taker. The Undertaker thought his little brother also died in the fire, but Kane actually survived. And after The Undertaker refused to be Paul's little lapdog, this dark secret was revealed to the public. This story did evolve and change as The Undertaker turned heel, by the way, but that's what we've got going into Badd Blood. At the pay-per-view, The Undertaker was scheduled to face Shawn Michaels in the first ever Hell in a Cell match, and The Undertaker's little brother was the last thing on anyone's mind as these two completely tore the house down. This Cell match ranks up there as one of my all-time favourite matches. When watching it live, I too totally forgot about The Undertaker's ongoing story because the match itself was just so gripping and so exciting to see unfold. But then, when The Undertaker signaled for the tombstone, the lights went out in the arena and fans watching at home were about to see Kane for the very first time. No one knew what to expect, no one knew what he would look like. Die-hard fans did get word that Glenn Jacobs was going to portray The Undertaker's little brother and he was also going to wear a mask, but that information wasn't readily available unless you were really clued in with newsletters and whatnot. When Kane walked down the aisle, he looked intimidating, he looked pretty scary, and the music along with the red lights went a long way in making the debut very memorable. Remember, fans had just witnessed an insane Hell in a Cell match, and now this was happening before their very eyes. Kane rips the cell door off, he tombstones his brother in the middle of the ring, Shawn Michaels is able to defeat The Undertaker, and Glenn Jacobs could now forget about Isaac Yankem DDS and the fake Diesel. The WWF had a new main event attraction on their hands. One of the all-time great debuts here. I wish new fans could watch this match without any idea about what's going to happen at the end so they could experience the whole thing the way us old school fans saw it back in 1997. You know the drill. Tell me your favourite debuts in the comment section and we can do a round 2 sometime in the future. Remember though, it's character TV debuts. So for example, if you enjoyed the debut of Bray Wyatt, then that's totally fine, even though we had Husky Harris beforehand. Try to keep it all WWF and WWE related for now, because I will look at other companies too in the future. I do hope you enjoyed this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and please take care.